Pleasant morning, people. I'm merely here to make an initial house announcement that we were scheduled to start at 9, but now my time is saying 9:30. My time is saying 9:30. You telling me your time is saying 9:15, but my time is not properly synchronized. Set at 9:15 minutes before for a reason. But we would start, since it's now, we had intended to start at 9:15. But I'm told now the current time is 9:15. So we would start at 9:20. But one of our panelists is still on the way. So bear with us, please. Thanks for having you. But for those of you who haven't had the breakfast as yet, I want to encourage you to go and partake. Thank you very much. Mr. PA Engineer. Good morning again. We are about to start, and I will begin by first calling a representative from the Radisson Hotel to do our safety briefing. I was just been advised that it's a recording in keeping with the times. COVID would have introduced that. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, invited guests, all protocols observed. On behalf of staff and management, I'd like to welcome you all to the Radisson Hotel. I'm Security Manager Kendall Cooper. There are no evacuation exercise scheduled for this morning, but to ensure your safety in the event of an emergency evacuation, the following protocols must be observed. The fire alarm will sound loud with a continuous ringing tone. Upon hearing the alarm, please remain calm, and with the assistance of our security personnel and a designated safety warden, you'll be guided to the nearest exit, which you'll utilize in an expeditious but orderly manner. Depending on the nature of the emergency, you'll be guided to one of our muster points, which are conveniently located at the southwestern end of the car park and a vacant lot opposite Radisson Road Fire Station. Once assembled, please make a head count to ensure that no member of your party is missing. If someone is not accounted for, please notify a staff member of the hotel. Do not re-enter the building before it is declared safe to do so by an authorized member of the Fire Service Department. An associate of the hotel would identify him or herself to assist you with the evacuation process. Thank you for your attention, and please do have a wonderful morning. Thank you.
All right, fellow co-operators, at this time, let me share with you that as we convene this hour, that my name is Wayne Estrada, and I'm designated as the chairperson for this event. At this point in time, in keeping with your program, I would like us to rise as we say the national anthem of Trinidad and Tobago. I think we will be ably assisted with the PA system as well. Thank you. Thank you very much, and you can kindly remain standing. We all recite credit. Lord, make me an instrument of thy peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, To be understood as to understand. To be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Thank you. You can kindly take your seats. As indicated before, the name is Wayne Estrada and I'm the chairperson for this proceeding. At this point in time, I need to just share with you, in keeping with our invitation, and when you mirror the view of our panelists, that there has been some significant adjustment. We are unable to gather all our panelists here today for various reasons. But this is our panelists, and I'm not taking the opportunity to introduce you to them now. That's the role of someone else. But you would familiarize yourself with them, whatsoever you know about them, keep the good things with you. At this time, I want to introduce the chairman or stroke coordinator of the Cooperative Credit Union Movement, Technical Committee Chairperson, no other than Mr. Kent Bayer, to bring you some welcoming remarks and some greeting. So, Mr. Bayer, you are invited to the podium.
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Ralph Henry, Mr. Gad Thomas, Mr. Andy Johnson, ladies and gentlemen, good morning everyone and welcome. My remarks are designed to give you an understanding of the reason for this seminar, as well as some idea of the CCUMTC's Cooperative Credit Union Movement Technical Committee and the role it has played in the development of cooperative legislation. The reason for the seminar. We have over the years accumulated a lot of information and we thought it was time. In fact, we long before this, we thought we should have disseminated that information to the movement. This is our second seminar, and we assure you that there will be more in the future. But the reason for this seminar is to develop a common understanding on the potential of cooperatives and their role in national development. We want to use this information to understand, to influence national policy on cooperatives and the development of appropriate cooperative legislation. Also to use this understanding to develop and implement strategies to fulfill the cooperative potential. So that is the intent of these seminars, to get an understanding and use that understanding to chart a way forward. National cooperative policy. There is a saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. We at the CCUMTC have taken every opportunity we have had to advocate for a national cooperative policy. However, this has not happened to date. And that policy, we say, should be grounded one movement, one regulator, one legislation. And this came out of recommendations of a study we did some time ago, and I will get to that later. But we have always advocated for a national policy. And this policy should be grounded on the values and principles of corporatism. The objective is supported by the following activities: to re-engage the communication process between and among cooperative sectors on matters of importance, to identify critical issues facing the sector and develop appropriate strategies to minimize the risk associated with these issues. To build a strong coalition among cooperative societies to provide greater value and service to members and the community at large. And lastly, to facilitate and support an ecosystem founded on a coherent national policy anchored in cooperative principles. So yes, the policy, this is what we want to achieve with the policy. We have been supported over the years by a number of units, and I wouldn't name them. In fact, I have here well over 20-something units. We are currently still, the committee still operates. To give you some background, the CCUMTC was formed way back in 2006. Some of you weren't even in the cooperative movement at that time. Negotiations with the central bank had just published its policy proposal document. The League and ACOP, most of you, the division in the movement, we were meeting at the central bank. The League on one side, ACOP on one side, some credit unions in the middle. And I have to give credence to one gentleman, Mr. Brian Moore. When he told the central bank, anything the ACOP chair says, I agree with it. And policy, the second paragraph in that policy proposal document clearly states, the central bank, not me, that they did not have the legislative framework to regulate credit unions. They said if the credit unions have to be regulated by the central bank, they must devise particular legislation appropriate to credit unions. And that is in this, anybody, it's on the central bank website. You can go and look for the policy proposal. That's in the second paragraph. They don't, they still don't. Following that, we initiate a study, and that study was the impact of the PPD on the credit union movement. That was done by Cariri Consultants. Various iterations of the credit union bill followed. The bill eventually lapsed in 2015 when elections were called. Similar to, at that same time, we took some time off to do what you want to call a strategic alignment of the CCUMTC. We brought in a consultant. He met with both ACOP and the League. And what we did coming out of that, we formed 3 committees. A technical committee, a communication committee, and a strategic committee. The strategic committee comprised the president of the League at that time, Mr. Joseph Remy, the president of ACOP, Fitzroy Otley, and a couple other presidents of credit unions. So that was that came out of that strategic alignment session. The strategic committee and the communication committee was not working as they should, and eventually everything was collapsed into the technical committee. So I'm trying to give you some background on where we are, what we have done so far. We then followed that with 2 other studies, which was the legal review of the credit union bill that was finished in August 2015. And one of the significant recommendations coming out of that was the establishment of an independent cooperative authority to govern the affairs of all cooperatives. And that would have consumed the cooperative division. This was accepted by government. That recommendation was accepted by government. We also did an impact assessment of the proposed credit union bill on credit unions and the cooperative credit union movement as a whole. That study was finished in January 2016. During that period of time, we met with and were recognized by the central bank. We were involved in negotiations with the central bank. We met with the Ministry of Finance. We met with the Attorney General, The Caribbean Regional Technical Assistance Center, that is CATAC, comes out of the, I think it's the World Bank. We met with representatives of the Caribbean Action Task Force, CTAF. We met with a number of government ministries and departments. The CCUMTC also participated in meetings with the cabinet-appointed committee established to determine the role of credit unions, the role of financial cooperatives in national development. The CCUM's input into a proposed draft national policy. A policy was developed by government. This policy was eventually sent to the ILO, who submitted comments on the government's policy. In the meanwhile, the CCUMTC developed its own policy. We took into account the comments of the ILO. We took into account what the government had done, and we submitted same to the government. To date, we have had no feedback. We also developed a draft legislative framework which looks at the development of the authority and take into account a revision of provisions in the Cooperative Societies Act. This was also presented to government, and we are waiting feedback on that. Cabinet approved the implementation of the Independent Cooperative Authority and as recommended by the CCUMTC to regulate cooperatives, and this was in Budget Speech 2019-2020. The cabinet-appointed committee, further to that, I spoke a little bit about that. The cabinet-appointed committee established to determine the future role of financial cooperatives in national development, and most of us remember this was the Lee Hunt Committee. They submitted their recommendations to government. Some of you would know those. The recommendations were the implementation of the authority, the establishment of a deposit insurance to protect shares and deposits held by members in credit unions. Then there were some low-hanging fruits, the encashment of government checks, the net pay of, allowing net pay of credit union members to go to the credit union account. Further, Cabinet appointed another committee to implement the recommendations of the Lee Hunt Committee, and that was the Edwards Committee. I want to say right here that the CCUMTC recognizes and supports the cabinet-appointed committee, the Edwards Committee, in what they are doing. To date, they have generated 4 quarterly reports. They have developed a policy proposal document on deposits and share protection. They have developed and implement an assessment tool for credit unions. They are now in the process of rolling out the results of that tool. So I want to say we support you, Mr. Andrews, on what you're doing, and we look forward to your continued collaboration. Where does the CCUM go from here? We continue to analyze and review. We await the deposit insurance for shares and deposit fund. We are looking at that still. We await the policy proposal document on the cooperative authority, which was promised some time ago, to give you some feedback on that. And other sessions, and the other thing we're looking at is to establish other sessions like this, because there needs to be widespread discussion on a policy. We need to be widespread discussion on the legislative framework we developed. There needs to be widespread discussion on the cooperative authority and the deposit insurance fund. I want to end by making a statement. and I don't know who is attributed to, but all beautiful relationships do not depend on how well we understand each other, but it depends on how well we manage the misunderstanding among us. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Brother Bayer. And I want to take the opportunity at this time, as I look around the room, to extend greetings and blessings to some persons and some organizations that play a very significant role in the cooperative credit union movement and indeed society. In our midst today is one of our national awardee, who is part of the committee that I sit on, the UMTC committee. And that person would have received a national award based on public service and credit union work. So I want to congratulate our good friend Esme Raphael. Esme, are you in the room here? Where is Esme? Stand and let them see you. For those who don't know you, it ought not go unnoticed and unannounced. Where is Esme? Busybody Esme? She's outside, so you all are familiar with Esme. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the chairperson of the Cabinet Implementation Committee for gracing us with his presence here today, Mr. Joel Edwards. There is Esme coming in here. Either you might want to call it retro or otherwise with respect to the hairstyle, but Esme is looking beautiful as usual. Esme is still competing with the youths. Yes, and because I am what I am by virtue of my identity, and I like to give this story plenty times, you know. The first time I went to America, I was speaking like this, and somebody said, "Wayne, you're on 9 months holidays," as I was in a different discipline. And they said to me, "You can't get no work in America if you talk so." I said, "But the Bajan don't change his accent, the Jamaican don't change his accent. This is my identity. I'm a Tobagonian, that's my identity." So I want to take the opportunity to thank all the Tobago Credit Union's participants who are here today for gracing us with their presence. And on that note, I have some good friends from another credit union that I'm familiar with, and cooperative. I'm not seeing anybody from the cooperatives that I'm familiar with and who were invited, like the Tobago Nutrition Cooperative Society. But I'm seeing persons from the Police Credit Union. You know? It's a kind of knob you just have to push, you know, because you know who would respond and you hear the response. So thank the Police Credit Union for being here. Antilles, my good friend Marlene from Antilles. I may forget some people, but my good friend Faye from Aero Services, she's here. The people from Ventia. If I leave you all, the people from Port, you know, I'm happy. The people from TechU. If I forget you, it's because I didn't know you. But don't beat me for that. So thank you very much for that. Oh yeah, how could I forget Teachers Credit Union? My good friends from Vienna, Austria. Those are my friends. The Diego Martin Credit Union, you know, I can't leave them out. The Public Services Credit Union, all right. You see, I have a little challenge there because there are so many Margarets in the room. So I didn't want to say Margaret, member of the committee, but thank you, Public Services Credit Union, for being here. I also want to thank, his name was called earlier by the chairman of the CCM UMTC committee, Mr. Andrews. Mr. Andrews, thanks for having you here. You're representing CFF, right? So thanks for having you all right here, you know? So as I get along with the program, it is my task to introduce you to the moderator. This moderator is well known to us. For those of us who are TV and who patronize and loyal to TV6, you would have been familiar with the morning edition. Most of you, right? And this gentleman would have been with TV6 and has been a journalist for more than 50 years. That might be more time than some of us our age in this room. He's currently a contributor and columnist, editor-writer with the Trinidad Express. He's now hosting a morning television program with WESN. And he was the CEO of the Government Information Services of Trinidad and Tobago during the period 2010 to 2015. You know then his role then. He's one of the partners and founder of MAT. And he's here with us today. He's no other than Mr. Andy Johnson, and he will be the moderator with us here today. The task of introducing the other panelists is not mine, and I wouldn't take it from anybody. That is for Mr. Andy Johnson to do. So therefore, I'm now handing over to the moderator, Mr. Andy Johnson, to do his role and function. Thank you very much for this time, participants.
I imagine you can hear me. Good morning, everyone. This is more than strange, you know, but positively so. So I want to tell you that what I'm doing now, by I think divine intervention, what I'm doing now caused me to have to look up the role and functions of cooperatives in national development in Trinidad and Tobago just weeks ago, because, like I say, by absolute divine intervention, I'm in my third month of an engagement with a member of the current cabinet, the Minister of Youth Development and National Service, as sort of unlikely as that sounds, given some people say my past sins between 2010 and 2015. So I was looking up this term, but before we get there, let me just tell you a little bit about how I come to this issue. I want to say from the outset that I'm a credit unionist as well, because I spent 6 years at the Guardian newspaper, 1997 to early 2000s. And I joined the Guardian Credit Union, and I continue to be a member of it today, even though I left the Guardian over 20 years ago. So in looking up this term, about the role of cooperatives in national development, for a speech the minister with responsibility for that was delivering 2 weeks ago, Minister Foster Cummings, I saw some things that I never understood before, that credit unions belong to this group of organizations known as cooperatives, and cooperatives have everything to do with national development, with personal development, and with professional development, from what I saw. Because a lot of times what the role and functions, the principles of credit unionism, they say, are superior to a lot of other kinds of organizations, because I read the thing where it said that one of the unique features of a credit union is that its power center is residing in the annual General Assemblies, at which those people who are elected to be there make the final decisions, and that cooperatives have to do with developing best relations among people in and of themselves, in the organizations, and for national development. So I put a lot of store in that. And we could talk a little bit more about how I come to this assignment, and the sense of awe that I got when I got the call from Mr. Moore to if I would do this. But so my job really is to refer to the two panelists who are going to take us through the better part of the proceedings. Dr. Henry, for some reason the information that was transferred to me this morning wouldn't show up on my mobile phone at all. But I don't think anybody here has any difficulty knowing who is and knowing about Dr. Henry. He's a foremost economist. He's a leading associate of an organization called Kyrie Consultants. I knew him as a teacher, a lecturer, a professor in his own right at the University of the West Indies, and then he was a member of one of the regulatory organizations in the country, such as the RIC is now. And he's been a mentor to a lot of people over generations in Trinidad and Tobago. The other panelist, Mr. Garth Thomas, he says he wants it only to be known that he's a Hall of Famer of the Trinity College, which is where he went, and also of an organization called TAIFA, that is the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors. And he's a facilitator at the Central Bank National Financial Literacy Program. So those are our two panelists for this discussion, which I think is going to be riveting, and which I think is absolutely important, given, as I said, the role, the principal role and the critical role of cooperatives in a society like Trinidad and Tobago, in any society for that matter, and the role of credit unions inside of that. So, without further ado, I want to invite Mr. Thomas to lead off with the statements that will form the discussions for this session. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Andy, the members of the panel, Dr. Henry, the members of the organizing committee. A great morning to you all. You like to get shortchanged? Well, you all just shortchange me. Yes? I wish you all a great morning. You see, somebody is sensitive. I could live with that. All right, I'm working with all of that. I am on a mission to try and make a little change that will create a big difference. And that is simply to change our habit in terms of greeting each other. I have nothing against good. I think it was back in the 70s, there was a film that was entitled The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly. Now you will notice, I will leave that for you. I'm sorry, I will behave. I will try and behave. Notice that we started with the good, but where we end up. Yes? So there is nothing wrong with good. But why should we settle for good when great is available? And guess what? Great is always available. So I would like to encourage all of you here today to join with me in my little crusade to change the way that we greet each other. Because, there has been some deterioration in the practice. At one time, you used to get a good morning. Now you just get morning. Am I right or am I wrong? You're lucky if you get a good morning. Yeah? You're getting morning. And I am just saying, can you imagine a Trinidad and Tobago where everywhere you go on any given day, that you hear the word great, and people greet you with greatness. They say, great God, great Janice, great Ken, great, great. Think of the psychological power of that vibration as we talk about national development. Now, I could give you a whole speech on that, but that is not what they asked me to do today. So, let me leave it at that. All right? So, I just want to encourage you. Now, I want to let you know that this is not an easy task. Because when I came to this realization myself, I had to fight a battle to change from my habitual good morning and to upgrade it to great morning. It's a continuing struggle, yes? But it is a worthwhile struggle. And it can make it's a small change, but it can make a big difference. And it's a difference that our nation needs. Okay. Now, context is everything. How many of you all in your life has put together a jigsaw puzzle? Yes? Yes? All right. How important is the picture on the box? All right? The picture on the box provides context. It provides guidance as to where each piece of the puzzle fits in. Yes? So when you speak and you don't establish context, then the odds are that whatever you say is going to be misconstrued, deliberately or otherwise. So when we talk about national development and we talk about the importance of the cooperative sector in national development, we must understand the context within which this national development is taking place. We must understand, and let me, for context purposes, let me read to you from a speech that was given in 1963 in Geneva by Haile Selassie, a speech which has been immortalized in song by Bob Marley under the title War. Let me give you a little excerpt from that speech. On the question, and I quote, "On the question of racial discrimination, the Addis Ababa Conference taught to those who will learn," I would like to underline that, it taught to those who will learn this further lesson, that until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, that until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, that until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, that until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, that until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. Now, what on earth does that have to do with the cooperative movement and national development? I want to submit to you that it has everything to do with it. And that is what I mean by placing context. Now, we are all very familiar with the racial part, that until the color of a man's skin and so on. What I want to underline in this speech is that until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation. This speech was given in 1963. Now, I wasn't particularly good in arithmetic, but I think that's about 59 years ago. Yes? And to this day, I do not know, and maybe my knowledge is limited, I do not know of any nation where there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens. Do you? So that brings us to the concept of the cooperative movement as against the capitalist system. Now, you have to understand, I am not the economist here, that's Dr. Ralph. But you have to understand that the capitalist system is about the few whining on the many at their expense. That's my, Trinidadianese interpretation of the thing. And I think you all can identify with it. All right? That is what capitalism is about. It is about the 1%ers. Let me be more specific. Holding hegemony over the whole national development issue. And you have to understand that that is directly and diametrically opposed to the concept of cooperativism. Yes? Which advocates equal distribution. Yes? So if we want as a movement to make real progress, and I want to commend the work done by the organizing committee and the report given by Mr. Dyer. But I want to tell you that what I heard when he was giving this report. Let me tell you what I heard. I heard we are winning many battles, but we're losing the war. I don't know if that's what you heard, but that is what I heard. And you have to understand that that is not by chance. That is deliberate design. Somewhere in the 18th century, there was a guy by the name of Antonio Gramsci who came up with the concept of cultural hegemony. And cultural hegemony is a fiendish construct by which the many, having been released from the shackles, the iron shackles of slavery, they have been enslaved mentally with the shackles of mind domination. And if you all don't understand cultural hegemony, I want to suggest that at the end of this meeting, sometime during this weekend, that you investiquire, as Sprangalang would say. You investiquire about this concept of cultural hegemony. Because if you have iron shackles around your wrists and legs, you know that you are a slave. But when they take those shackles off, and they create a mindset in you that enslaves you, you think you're free, but you are a slave. And if you look at all the talk about the cooperative movement, you might be seduced in believing that this government is serious about cooperative development. And I submit to you this morning, they are not. If you drive down on Brian Lara Promenade, past the Central Bank, you will see that there are 5 banners flowing, which articulate the themes of Vision 2030. I am tempted to ask how many of you are here today have taken the time and the trouble to go online and examine the details of Vision 2030. I won't embarrass anybody. But I want to suggest that it is necessary if you are serious about what we are here doing today. Somebody tell me when I run out of time. Because you know. I have a few minutes. I like the word few. You know it. All right? But one of the themes, the first theme of Vision 2030, which please do not categorize Vision 2030 as a P&M vision for national development. It is supposed to be an all-inclusive, and you know that's a term that that resonates with all of us. You know, all-inclusive. Yeah? It is supposed to be an all-inclusive vision for the whole nation. Yes? And the first theme of that vision is putting people first. Recognizing that our prime national asset are its people. David rather recognized it in his Kaiso. Yes? But it is one thing to talk. You know, talk is proverbially cheap. All right? Action speaks louder than words. And there is no question in my mind, and I suspect in the minds of all of you all here present this morning that the cooperative sector is by far the most important sector and possesses the greatest potential for the transformation of our national economy than any other. That is my position this morning. And if that be the case, I want you to consult the budget, the last national budget, and see how much money, because you know the money really tells the tale, how much money has been allocated relative to what this sector has to do. I'm telling you, talk is cheap. Action speaks louder than words. And the people who control this economy is not cooperative people. And it gets worse. As I look across the cooperative sector, and who want to get vexed with me could get vexed with me. As I look across the cooperative sector, I see leadership who reflect and generate the mindset of a capitalist. So you have a capitalist mindset running a cooperative movement. Well, you and I know that ain't gonna work. But that is the reality that we face today. And if we are serious, and we all have to be because all of we living here, if we are serious about national development, that mindset has to change. And therefore I say to you in the words of Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that is the moderator's role to thank him and extend that. But just a little intervention at this time. It slipped me some housekeeping. The washrooms are at the back of this room, so those of us who are familiar with the Radisson. And there's also one on the first floor. If it's too crowded at the bottom, you go upstairs. And coffee and tea is available throughout this session. Thank you. Over back to you, Mr. Moderator.
Seem to have some challenges with the gear here, but all right, well, I think that was a close to brilliant start by Mr. Thomas. I think he laid out some points that I think could be provocative, but they are also sort of points for pondering. The capitalist system is about the few whining on the many, but the movement that we are about to, well, in the process of developing, he says it is founded on putting people first, and the cooperative sector is the most important for national development. I think that is established in some of the readings that I've done, because among other things, it causes us as people to work together with common goals and aspirations, or at least it's supposed to. People who control the economy are not cooperative people. That's his assertion and contention, and that a capitalist mindset is running the cooperative movement, and that has to change. Well, to what extent the next speaker will either concur with that or want to take a side with it. So let's hear from Dr. Henry, Dr. Ralph Henry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. And good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. After having, you know, in West Indian cricket of yore, we had good opening bats, so that those coming after didn't feel that they had too much of work to do, because when you have a century from each of the opening bats, well, you just go there and you score a few runs and the team will be all right. And I feel very much in that situation, so thank you, Garth. But I want to place my presentation also in context, but in context of maybe our history, a little more of a history. Because somebody mentioned, I think Andy mentioned that, or the chair of the proceedings mentioned that Andy had been around for 50 years as a journalist. And just yesterday I had to reflect on the fact that 50 years ago, I worked in the Ministry of Labor, which at that time was responsible for cooperatives and was gearing up to make sure that the new act, the Cooperative Societies Act, would be implemented across the board and take the cooperative movement, whether as agricultural cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, or credit unions, would take everything up to another level. So the legislation had been provided to create a backdrop, to create a platform on which the entire cooperative movement could grow. But that Cooperative Act was developed against one of the more critical moments in our history after the Black Power movement in 1970 declared that enough was enough and the society needed to change to ensure that those words in our anthem that we keep every time we sing it, every creed and race should find an equal place. That was what the Black Power movement was about. Every creed and race should have an equal place. And some argued that maybe Williams, in a sense, reverted back to his own early history in treating with the inequality that he knew to exist in a society where capitalism had been built on slavery in the Caribbean. His thesis, which today people are brushing off and making it the basis for the entire movement about, the word slips me now, reparations. The whole thesis about reparations is based on Williams's work, where he established that the capitalist system was built in large measure on slavery in the Caribbean. But when you read his works way back in the 1940s, his and the work of Arthur Lewis, you see that the two doyens in academia of this region in the first half of the 20th century were concerned about inequality. Arthur Lewis wrote a book, he must have been in his early 20s, Labor in the West Indies, in which he decried the reality of these colonies, which 100 years after the end of slavery were mired in poverty, malnutrition, malaria, tuberculosis, atrocious housing conditions, which resulted in the fires of 1937-38 and the Butler riots. And he made, Lewis, in fact, made a submission to the Moyne Commission in which he repeated the problem. And Williams subsequently became the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And if you think back to the words in our national anthem, here every creed and race find an equal place, clearly he would have been to some extent responsible or at least approve of the anthem that had been prepared by Castani, I think it was his name. And surely when he made that statement or had those watchwords here, together we aspire, together we achieve, there's implicit in that statement is this notion of equity and equality, that we're all going to grow together. But of course, reality imposes on you certain constraints. And his initial strategy of development required his promoting foreign enterprise and local enterprise in the development of industry, which led to the industrial estates as we know them today, in which some of the people who are today part of that percent were encouraged to use their resources to establish businesses that will produce goods and services, or more so goods that could replace our reliance on the export of sugar and to some extent oil at that time. It didn't work because it was expected that those industries would have created the jobs and led to the development of large numbers of, pulled a large number of people out of poverty. Yes, some jobs were created, but surely not enough to create, to satisfy the needs of the moment when you had a high birth rate and large numbers of people, young people, coming onto the labor market who couldn't find jobs. And then, not only could they not find jobs, but they realized that they were not of the color to access the jobs that were becoming available. And that, in a sense, led to the Black Power riots. But along the way, Williams did something else. When he realized that his strategy was not working, he thought that, look, I need to change strategy, and I would move to take the state into the creation of enterprise in this country. And this was in 1968-69. And he published a white paper on public sector participation. And in introducing that white paper, it was said that to the extent that the private sector, the then private sector, did not have the resources, either did not have the resources or the interest in developing industry in the way that this was necessary, the state would do the needful. The state didn't have money then, but the state suddenly found itself awash with funds in the early 1970s, 73 to be exact. 72 was a very horrible year, in fact. Early 73, Williams kind of gave up and he said, I'm going. I don't know if some of you would have been around and would have remembered this. He said he was going. And then oil prices shot up. And he decided to stay. Disappointed some people, of course, because he said, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay me down. And the water became a little less troubled. So he didn't lie down, got up, and implemented a state promoted strategy that was linked to his initial efforts at equity by creating what he called in 1970-71 a people's sector. And the people's sector was supposed to be the cooperatives, a small business window that he cut in the Industrial Development Corporation. And then when the money came, the state had the resources to take the lead. And that's what explains Point Lisas, on which this country has grown for the last 50 years or so, until that too seems to have run out of steam. And unfortunately, those who have come after Williams, with presumably the national movement, and a national movement which is supposed to ensure that every creed and race find an equal place. And together we will aspire, and together we will achieve. That notion of the nation, including everybody, and today, we have at the UN this notion of inclusive growth. Words are said that seem to suggest that that notion of national development that includes inclusive growth is still on the agenda. But I think I agree with you that they're really words. And the commitment that one saw in 1970, 71, 72, etc., of Williams to have inclusive growth is no longer there. And he himself realized in 1979 that he was not really achieving it. And I think when he died, he was really a frustrated man. Had a lot of resources, attempted to grow this economy in keeping with this notion of equity, where he said, the sharks are eating the sardines. And there are whales, I think he said something about whales marauding. But the sharks were eating the sardines. So the sardines that had been stimulated, whether in cooperatives or small businesses, by 1979, they were being eaten up by the sharks. And it shows you the challenge, the problem of two competing systems. Because I suppose, I don't know if it's human nature or if culture can so repress human nature, if human nature is associated with wanting things for yourself, and therefore wanting to profit ahead of everybody and arrive where God says, where, everybody is, the whole capitalist notion is that the few will whatever on the rest. Because this notion of community and cooperatives are built on the notion of a bond among all that results in sharing the benefits equitably. And it does not really exist in large measure in this country. And to the extent that we have attempted to do it, we must always recognize that it's going against the grain of the capitalist system. But having said that, I like to remind people, as I used to when I was a lecturer at the university, that human beings have lived under all kinds of economic systems. But there's this notion today that only the capitalist system can lead to high standards of material well-being for citizens. That's not true. And even in the capitalist system, there have been examples of cooperative endeavors that are as huge and larger than many so-called capitalist ventures, including cooperative endeavors that have put countries on the map. And I haven't examined the box of the milk outside, but when you go home, check your cheese, your butter, and your milk. And you may find that it's Anchor. But who is Anchor? Anchor is produced by a cooperative, Fonterra. It might be in some fine print there. Fonterra. Assets, billions. Producing milk is maybe 30% of the exports of New Zealand is comprised of products of Fonterra. There is in Spain a cooperative, Mondragon, I suppose that's the correct pronunciation. Huge cooperative, run and managed by the workers. It's an example of a worker-based cooperative. Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative, one of the largest cooperatives in the world, in India. The latter two examples come out of problems in society, the Spanish Civil War. At the end of the Spanish Civil War, area of the Basque countryside, the people are poor, etc. They decide to do something. They organize a little cooperative. The little cooperative gets involved in a number of things, and then they decide to form other little cooperatives. And suddenly they realize that they have a bit of cooperatives of cooperatives, engage in all kinds of activity. And today it's huge. Mondragon, check it. Indian Farmers Fertilizer Cooperative, again, out of difficulty, people get together and decide that they have a problem together and they're going to solve it together. A cooperative. But do you know that in our own society, when you look back, you can see that at different times in our society, we have had cooperative endeavors or cooperative-oriented type arrangements. So the Susu, people got together and pooled their resources and, mobilized credit. We use big words these days, mobilization of credit. Well, that's what the Susu was, or is. And we brought it. Slaves, Indian indemnities had something similar as well. And we used it in hard times to get things done. Lend hand, box. In the late 1880s, people realized, well, we want to be buried decently. So the state had introduced legislation affording the development of friendly societies. And those of us who are my age will remember that their grandparents who ensured that you went and paid 25 cents or whatever religiously at the friendly society because they wanted to make sure that if they were ill that there was something in place to provide them a little bit of assistance to go to the doctor if they didn't want to rely totally on the public health system, which is still developing, and surely, if they didn't make it, they could be buried decently. They wouldn't need to be buried in the pauper's cemetery. You don't want to be going there. I suppose you won't get to heaven if you went there. All right? So, what was a friendly society? It's a case, it's a community-oriented, we get together, we pool resources to treat with some of our needs. The late 1930s was a horrible period in the Caribbean. And it led, of course, to the riots. But it was also the period when we started to develop the cooperatives, and more so the credit unions. And I think TECU was started in the 1940s, 1946. All right? So some legislation was put in place, and it allowed the Susu idea to be institutionalized within the context of the laws, emerging legislation of the place at the time. And the birth of the credit unions, and we see, and then of course the cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives, consumer cooperatives. So in periods of distress, sometimes we realize, this capitalist, each for himself or herself, is not the way. And maybe we need to look at the cooperative way. And I would submit that maybe we have come to this juncture again in 2023, as we look back and look around and look forward. When, again, as might have happened in 1970, if even Williams was committed to doing certain things, it's the backlash of what had not happened that led to the reorganizing of the Cooperative Societies Act into one piece of legislation, the Cooperative Societies Act of 1971. Maybe the conditions were ripe for that. But you should also remember that in addition to the act and the state getting involved in directly productive activity, there's also this notion that if the capitalist system is growing and will grow, and sharks might eat sardines, let me still put in place something that will mitigate, that might mute the rapaciousness of this capitalist system, where one group feels that they must be in control and reap all the benefits. So immediately as a stock exchange was being established, they found it necessary to set up something today known as the unit trust, where when you get units in the unit trust, you're already buying into the capitalist system. So those who are making money in the capitalist system, you have at least 10% of whatever they are earning. All with a view to ensuring that every creed and race can still find, and in this case, those who are the second-class citizens can get a little piece of the action. So what I'm saying in effect then is that you really need a state that is committed, not just simply to say the words, but is driven at every stage of the way to push the envelope, because you're right, Garth, the capitalist system does not really entertain the cooperative model. So you always have to be fighting it. But the way our societies are organized, it might be very difficult for us to create, quote unquote, a cooperative economy. So it's constant battle. But those who are outside of the system and want to create cooperatives and create unions and all these other measures must understand what you're up against and what we are up against. And I suppose the admission of a certain group to Mr. Anthony Boudin some years ago tells you the story, that one group admitted that they're small, but they control so much of the economy. And not only that, I have heard, and it was in a newspaper some time ago, that a certain gentleman made bold to say that he didn't think that the state should be involved in all of these enterprises, that they should be privatized. And when he said privatizing, when he mentioned the word privatizing, he was not referring to the model of privatization that Williams enunciated. Because when he took the state into the state enterprise sector, or created the state enterprise sector, he argued then that in time, these enterprises would be privatized to the people, so that the vast majority of people could buy shares, as they do in the unit trust. They'll buy shares in these new entities that were being created with state funds, the funds of the people of the country. They would have shares in it. But this gentleman's model of privatization was it being sold lock, stock, and barrel to a few groups. So his notion of privatization has no room for inclusive growth. But what shocked me, what I remembered when I heard that statement is that about 10 years ago, I was talking to a representative of a political party and referred to the Williams model of privatization. And you know, our parties, our primary parties have that notion, you know, national in their name. And the gentleman rebuked me thereby suggesting that, you know, any privatization should be, you know, allow for inclusive. He said this notion of nationalism and nationalism is passé. And he was then in a position to ensure that his notion of privatization would apply. And would apply not in the way Williams might have intended, but in the way the representative who argued for privatization would have, you know, encouraged. So all of this is to say that yes, we have to keep going and pushing the cooperative movement, but we have to understand that the challenge, and we are only up to the challenge if there's that amount of bonding among groups of cooperatives that they're prepared to go the distance. And going the distance means not only being committed to your own cooperative and making sure that it keeps growing, but also campaigning and doing what members of the League and others in the movement are doing in facing to the government, whatever is faced, telling them that we are cooperatives forever. Thank you.
No?
I didn't go too long.
Because I think we... Right, thanks a lot. Because I think we have a lot to chew on. As Dr. Henry was talking, my notes mentally went back to the debates in the House of Representatives and in the Parliament for the setting up of the Unit Trust Corporation. And from my mental notes about what sticks there, and the person who used that phrase, allowing the sardines to swim among the sharks, was the late Mervyn D'Souza, because he was the minister in the Ministry of Finance talking about that matter with the creation of the Unit Trust Corporation. And the question is, to what extent the Unit Trust Corporation is functioning in that manner to allow the sardines to swim among the sharks? That's one of the questions I want to see whether people would speak to. In addition to however you want to respond to the presentations by Mr. Thomas and Dr. Henry. And the question outside of that for me is Dr. Henry wrapped up on saying that we have to keep pushing, understanding what we are up against. To what extent the cooperative movement and the credit union movement inside of that is prepared to do that. My sense is that this is a kind of call to review where credit unions are inside of the cooperative movement to take on the task that is necessary to be taken on. But just before I invite those of you who want to respond, either way in which I just go back to something that comes from my formative years. Yesterday I was interviewing somebody on TV about life and the stages of life from the beginning to the end. We're talking about this nun who lived up to 117, but she was ready to go, but she said God wasn't ready for her, and so on and so on. So Dr. Jennifer Rouse, the country's foremost gerontologist, was making a point about the journey of life, and she talked about, your most important bonding happens with your mother holding you like this, and the bonding you get from that to start you off in life. And I said to her, well, look, maybe something is wrong with me, because I couldn't remember my mother raising me at all. I was raised by my grandmother. I used to go and look for my mother. Sometimes have to break away to go and do that, and so on. I grew up with my grandmother, who, there were two things that were important to her. One was the Bible, and the other one was her society card. I grew up to know what that meant, but when she couldn't find that, she was all over the place in a mess, because she belonged to a friendly society in Siparia, and there were times when she had to go there, and this card had to be at her beck and call all the time. And the other point from what the gentleman was saying is that I grew up in a place where the credit union hall was the #1 building in the village. But the village is Los Bajo, but some people felt that that sounded too bad, so they wanted to adjust the name to call it Los Bajos and so on and things. And then we grew up, I grew up with the generation before me feeling a kind of way about how we were looked at by other people in the villages around. So it developed a kind of personality. Dr. Henry was talking about that before we went on, about how you inhibit how other people see you, and you respond to that. And that's how some of us came up. Because they call the credit union hall, which is on that Siparia area road in Los Bajo, it's called the Palo Seco Credit Union. And I went to a school called Santa Flora Easy, which is in Los Bajo. So to tell you they didn't like us and so on. And then we had the cemetery. Between Sipara and Erin, the only cemetery was in Los Bajo. So everybody afraid us. But I'm making the point about the credit union hall, how it was central to whatever we did. That's why all the christenings and all the weddings and what have you would take place at the Parasical Credit Union in Los Bajo, just after Los Bajo Junction. And then the business about everybody that I knew in my grandmother's generation had a society card, because that's where the thing started. The question is to what extent that provided them and us with the kind of foundation that was being aspired to in the early 80s, when they were debating this question about the setting up of the Unit Trust Corporation, and to what extent the Unit Trust Corporation has been fulfilling its mandate, never mind all the money that they say it's making all the time, and for the rest of us, and how in fact cooperatism can work in a capitalistic cooperative republic that is in Guyana. Is that an example that we want to look at in terms of where we are now as a cooperative society, given the role and function that we're talking about here, and what we need to do? So I hope you excuse me for that kind of elaboration to try and edit.
Mr. Chairman, I want to start by saying I was in two minds if to come to this session. Oh, Ronald Bob, the Grammatic Credit Union.
Yeah.
I was in two minds if to come to this session, because I keep the talk shop after talk shop after talk shop. But I said, if I didn't come to this, I'd be missing my responsibilities to continue to push to see a better movement. And I want to start with the chairman, if I may, and I don't know if the chairman of the technical team is willing to give a response. Because here's where some of the issues are in the movement in respect to national development. A few weeks ago, Mike, I didn't get a circular from the league having some issues with this particular session. And I came to an SGM in the same place, right here, last week, where, last week or this week, recently, in this session, they got an SGM right here, where the president diverted from his welcoming speech to indicate to the members present there was no collaboration with the league in respect to this. Maybe, Mr. Chairman, that's why one of the main issues is where we cannot go further than how we are right now. Because my understanding is the name of the committee is the technical committee of the league. So I was bewildered to see a circular saying they were not consulted. And secondly, the statement he made at the meeting that, they were not involved in the setting up of this particular seminar. So whether or not the chairman of the technical committee want to respond, because you see, that's where the problem lies, at the leadership level. Part of our problem is at the leadership level. So whether or not the chairman want to respond to that, which can have resulted maybe less people coming here today, because some of them might feel like if the league say they say sanction by them, like let me go now. And maybe, Mr. Chairman, I could be wrong, there's some of your panelists which I saw in the original circular, not here today, because I don't know where communication takes place. And they say they can't come. So maybe the chairman of the technical team may want to explain because he mentioned a last line of a statement about communication. I can't remember the phrase he used, but to me a lot of people agree with the statement. So maybe I don't even want to explain that, maybe at the end, because it appeared to me that there's some communication problems in the movement at the highest level. And when you talk about national development, we have to look inward first. I want to talk about, and that's why I talk about leadership, because I have noticed over the last few years, like what happened now, you just have putting out circulars in the newspaper about for board and committees, for their elections, for the AGMs, and they ask for qualifications. But is there a love for the movement? Because at one time I was in the nomination committee of our credit union. And when we interviewed 2 persons in particular for the board, and we asked them, well, why you want to be on the board? What was the reason coming to the interview? They said to improve the resume. And they were very blunt to improve the resume. There was no idea about what the philosophy of the credit movement was about. What were they bringing to the table to improve the unit? They came for their own personal development. To go to CCC maybe, go to work you, enjoy yourself. It had nothing to do with the development of the unit to which they are asking to be put up for election. And maybe that's the culture we have now. Because when I first joined the movement, there was a love. Now it's position. Who could profile themselves? So we look inward. That's why people look at us, maybe they don't respect us. Because we don't respect ourselves. Yeah? And that's why the culture movement now is we have 125, 28 credit unions. We are too much. Because everybody, it kind of like churches in New York, every church has a street corner. You have 10 members, but you call Reverend Dr. Pastor so-and-so. Everybody want to be a king in their own. And maybe chairman, I can reference maybe Jamaica or counterparts who had a similar number of credit unions, not only had 6 big credit unions. And the idea was some people have to pull back for the movement to go forward. But everybody want to be a board and a president. In Jamaica, there are 6. And the government have to take notice of that because they are driving force. They are together. Understand? Mr. Chairman, we have an impending credit union act for a number of years, still pending. And it is said that if at all the act is proclaimed or passed in the form that is in, some units, in particular small ones, have to close down. And we have been told over the years that maybe we need to sort of amalgamations, some mergers to build strength within the movement. But that ain't going to happen because if the thinking, as the Reverend Dr. Thomas said, is in the mind, people want to be an own board, an own president. We coming together. Some units in problems, not only that too. The credit unions lately have been in the news all the time, bacchanal. We cannot self-regulate ourselves. And therefore will be the position we're in now, and we can't go forward. We are divisions in the credit union movement. We talk, we are friends, but we have divisions, and it's not being healed. And therefore, Chairman, we just ask the question, because I know we have other speakers. Do we have the will? I'll give you another term, but do we have the will to do what we have to do to make our voices heard in the financial services sector that become a driving force in this country? Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Is there somebody who would want to respond to that, add to it, or challenge it, or interrogate it? Mr. Chairman. Well, you could go to the mic in the meantime, Mr. Moore.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I want to indicate at this time that whereas the contribution from my colleague there is very significant, I want us to stay in line with our focus this morning, the role of cooperatives in national development. I want to focus on that. But we're going to get back to that. We're not going to put our head in the sand with respect to what he would have said. They're very touching, and it's things that we need to address. I'm just saying that for now. From where I sit, I'm the chairman, but I think I have the opportunity to ask questions and make statements. One of the things when I get a mic comes as a weapon, a very serious weapon. And I want to say from one of the panelists, when he speaks in terms of greatness, when I left a certain discipline, I went into another discipline. I came into I now have internalized that. Since that time, 1996 to now. It was in Orlando, Florida. Since greatness is possible, excellence is not enough. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. That was Les Brown. Since greatness is possible, excellence is not enough. Everybody being excellent, but you want to be great. And when you get great, you do wonderful things. Some of the utterances heard by my friend there, and indeed by my coordinator, convener of the technical committee, when he made mention of certain things. We send out an invitation indicating some speakers that we would have invited. And I'm going to respond to some of the things that my last went over. Most of them responded positively. But in the last half, the last minute, there appeared to be some external force in terms of intervention. And they would have cancelled. So you would have come here with a certain level of expectation. And we have to make it possible. And my friend spoke about a letter. Yes, that letter. Some credit unions gave us reasons why they're not coming because of that letter. So yes, there is fragmentation, but we're not going to dwell too much about that. We're not here for that today. We want people to get some takeaway about national development. And if I should go biblically, Ecclesiastes 3 says, for everything there's a season and a purpose under the sun. There's a time for everything. Everything in life. You see these grounds that I stand on here? I consider these sacred grounds. Why? I learned so many things in this room. I remember I came to a conference here, and on these walls were plastered with former leaders. Gorbachev, Chambers, Eric Williams, Kamala, this, that, and the other. And something is synonymous with them. They are the past. They don't be there forever. It tells you that everything in life is temporary. What we need to do is to put systems in place for the continuity and the sustainability of any idea and development that we have. Is that good for you? Serve your time. You are here now. Forget who want to bash you. You do what you have to do. So at the end of the day, you're leaving a legacy that could be highly remembered. I want to leave that with you all. Having said that, and Brother and Dr. Henry would have spoken about Anchor, give us the Anchor idea that it's a cooperative. There's a football club in the world, the biggest football club in the world, they are cooperative as well. Okay? We have many opportunities here for cooperative development. And when we are saying cooperatives in national development, and some of the invitees that we would have had, that is we are looking for an aspect of what government would have done. But we can do it ourselves, you know. Let us look down the road. Is there a taxi cooperative down on the corner? Let me say to you, Uber is making so much money. Credit unions could help their members to have a pickup transport system using a cooperative, you know. Because in Trinidad, especially with this carnival, a lot of people looking for transport. The hotels can't provide it. We could finance some of our members to come together, form a little cooperative, and get transport that could be properly managed, efficiently managed, and complying with all the regulations of Trinidad. That is a cooperative. That's an idea, planting a seed that some of you here could go back and start in the morning, using your own vehicle. You'd rather buy no new vehicle because you're dealing with transport business. So an idea, the question is, the role of cooperatives. So a small and mini cooperative dealing with transport. Right? So that's an idea. So I'll leave it there and I plant those seeds for you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Moore, you were going to head to a microphone.
Good. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good morning again to all my cooperative colleagues here. Let me say how happy I was to hear both Garth Thomas and Dr. Henry make some critical distinctions with respect to cooperative operations and capitalist operations. We in the movement have very much that we have to do. A lot of it we have left undone. So I think we could take responsibility for that. But when it comes to the role of cooperatives in national development. While the sector has its role and its responsibilities, our various governments also have their role and responsibilities in facilitating organizations and groups that have some chance of us living out every creed and race, finding an equal place. Dr. Henry alluded to Eric Williams and his people's sector. There was a plan, and everyone knew where they fit in that plan. It is my view, and this is only my view. Nothing like that exists today. The cooperative sector is a sector with so much potential, economic, social, and otherwise. But I think our governments, I say governments, have only glancing and superficial interest in ordinary people, in cooperatives, realizing that potential. Once upon a time, going back to that same people's sectors, you had ministries responsible for cooperatives, and you could identify them. The Ministry of Labor and Cooperatives, there was something else on cooperatives, because the then authorities considered cooperatives important to national development. Now, if you don't follow politics, you don't know where cooperative stands. Somebody tacked them on to a ministry called Youth and National Development. They didn't even bother to include cooperatives. Doesn't that tell us something?
It's not in the name. It's not in the name.
Everybody is running hither and thither.
It's not in the name.
We had the Lee Hunt Committee. We now have an implementation committee dealing with cooperatives and so on and so on. But I think, as Garth Thomas said, if you don't know where the hell you're going, any road will take you there. There are issues of legislation, there are issues of regulation, and other issues facing the movement now. What is guiding all these efforts? What will allow us to knit these strands together so that the cooperative sector moves ahead positively and makes its contribution to national development and the national economy? We have nothing. There is no national cooperative policy to guide all these things. So every morning you wake up, you hear something, they're working on legislation. What policy is guiding that legislation? They're working on making the cooperative department better and so on. What national policy is guiding that? For credit unions, apparently it is now urgent to introduce some deposit insurance, so on and so. Necessary, but what is guiding that? There is no national policy. And I posit, notwithstanding the fact that we have secondaries, we have the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago, we have the CFF, we have STAP Fund, I can't remember its new name, and so on and so on. What is guiding all these strands into coherent action that will allow the cooperative sector and the cooperative philosophy to help facilitate every creed and race, finding an equal place, no first-class and second-class citizens? What we are hearing now, and let me stop using you, let me say what I am hearing now in the circles that matter are intended actions that will cripple the cooperative sector, particularly credit unions. Over the last little while, credit unions, especially smaller credit unions, have had to assume greater and greater administrative expenses for a variety of things. Necessary, anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism, this and that and so on, and all the other administrative things. I mentioned one yesterday at another forum, the introduction of new international financial reporting standards and so on. IFRS 9, case in point. Deposit insurance, which will add another layer of bureaucracy and administrative costs. Not that we don't want to protect people's share and deposits, you know. That is important. But where is the national cooperative policy to guide that? Nowhere around. So I say all that to say, as Dr. Henry had said, we up against a wall here, you know. We have to dig in and be determined to resist all these various forces ostensibly working on behalf of the cooperative sector. But in my view, if we're not careful, the prescriptions they're giving us, the prescriptions might work, you know, but the patient will die. I rest here for the time being, Mr. Moderator.
All right, can I ask you a question, Mr. Moore? For whatever period it will last, as somebody who at present has the air of the Minister of Youth Development and of National Development, I may be tempted to give him some kind of a report as to what transpired here, given some of what you're saying. Do you know whether, or you should know whether the ministry was invited to this, or the department of the Cooperative Development Department and so on?
Andy, I think you're trying to cause confusion, you know.
No,
I'm going to tell you something. This event was meant to attract the widest participation, not only among cooperators in the sector, but the general public.
right.
My minister got the first, I think it's the first, it would have been one of the first invitations to do the feature address here.
Well, it's important to know that.
Say again?
It's important to know that.
Yes. Among others, of course, I won't call their names unless I am asked direct questions. Right? So this is not something we were trying to do under a bushel or anything, you know. We recognized that for the survival and the growth of this sector, there has to be a lot more discussion, a lot more consultation, including from our government, because they set national economic policy, and the cooperative sector must be situated in whatever plans the government has for national economic development. This sector has a lot to offer. This sector has a network of offices and branches all over this country, especially the rural areas. This sector has offered to put that network to the government for its use in the rollout and delivery of its social programs, its poverty eradication programs, and so on, and so on, and so on. You think any of them take it on? None of them take it on. But every year, each Minister of Finance, before he does the budget, makes a big hoo-ha about calling this sector and calling that sector and calling the other sector. I was fortunate for many years to represent the movement at those budget discussions where we made recommendation over recommendation over recommendation. Here we are.
Yeah, but you still continue to invite them. But that's important to know, so that somebody can't say that they weren't aware of the forum and so on and so on. That's what I'm trying to get at.
You're representing the ministry.
Yeah. Am I live?
Yes.
Okay, you know, there are a couple things that emerge from our discussions this morning. Not too sure if everybody are aware of them, so let me underline. There is a war going on. I don't know if we understand that. All right? Do not fool yourself. The capitalist system is hostile to cooperative system. It's hostile. When our members go to a bank to borrow money, which is a mystery, that, or maybe it is something that just has to be investigated, that you can have credit unions who not meeting the E1 criteria, all right, relative to loanable money as compared to actual loans, but you still have members of those credit unions going to the bank to borrow money. Now, one of the things that blew my mind when I heard about it is that there are credit unions who have hundreds of millions of dollars of their members' money in bank accounts, earning no money for the credit union. Earning money for the bank. Because that is the money that the bank using to lend to your members and making a profit on it. Now that is as crazy as you can get, but that is a reality. And those same banks, when those members approach them for loans, one of the questions they ask, are you a member of a credit union? Yes? And when you identify the funds you have in a credit union, they tell you to get the loan, surrender your shares. All right? Now, if that is not a hostile act, I don't know what hostility is all about. And that is happening all the time. We have to understand that there is a war on. Just because blood is spilling for you to see, although there is blood spilling, that is a side effect of that, but we're not going to go in there. All right? You have to understand that there is a war on. And once you understand that there is a war on, then you have to equip yourself to deal with it. Now, we have to own what we have. You cannot change what you don't have. You cannot do anything with what you don't have. Don't waste time bewailing what you don't have. Own what you have. There are resources within this credit union movement that are, if properly mobilized, with a proper strategy, which I think is what Brian is saying. If there's a national policy to mobilize these resources, this movement, this people's sector, this cooperative movement can change Trinidad and Tobago for the better and the best in a very short space of time. That potential is there. We must recognize it. And we must seek to see how we can put that in. Let me make a suggestion. Our laws as credit unions, in particular, require that a certain percentage, I believe it's 5%, yes, set aside for education and training, yes, and information. That's one of the cooperative principles, hopefully, that we follow it. There are benefits inherent in credit union membership that a lot of credit union members don't know about. They don't know that credit unions provide the best long-term savings instrument available in the financial sector. They don't know that. But that is a reality. All right? We need to promote that. Part of those education funds should go toward promoting that information and beating our members over their heads with it until they understand what they have. A credit union share account is the only instrument in the financial system that ensures those savings against death. That is DEATH, LP, LS, we call it. A lot of credit union members don't understand LP, LS. Loan protection, life savings, insurance. Where else can you save $50,000? Have a $100,000 loan on the $50,000. Die, the debt dies with the debtor, the $100,000 go on poor, and your members, your beneficiaries get $50,000, which is your shares, plus $50,000, which is your life savings insurance. What other instrument provides this? Yes? Do we promote it? Do we promote it? I'm just saying, let us work with what we have, because we can't work with what we don't have. We can't work with what we wish we had. And we can't work with what we hope someday, some bright morning, that the government will give us. We cannot work with those things. All we can work is what we have. And all I am saying is that we have plenty. Let us understand we have plenty. But let us understand that there is the sixth principle of cooperatives is cooperation among cooperatives. Understand that. That must cease to be just words. We must find ways, as I have recommended here just now. And yesterday on the meeting that we had, I talked about a credit union bank that is run by, we know we had one, and I know why it went the way it went. All right? That don't mean to say that the concept is dead. And it has to be revisited, because why have all your hundreds of millions of dollars in the commercial banking sector when you can have your own bank where this money is, which will be more favorable to your members, which will be more favorable to individual credit unions in financial distress and so on. Why don't we do these things? This ain't nothing new. I'm sure I'm not saying anything new. What are we going to do?
Yes, sir. You had a hand up on this side somewhere, or? Yes, ma'am. No, the lady in the back there. Yeah. Otherwise, she goes to the microphone. Let me just say this. I mean, it's not institutional, but I think it was a personal initiative that was highly lauded. A couple of months ago, I went to a funeral in my district. A man named Alvin Stevenson, who was senior in the Palo Seco Credit Union, several years my junior, but the eulogy, he was high in the former Petrotrin in the administrative structure, but the eulogy spent more time talking about his role and function as a senior member of the Parasco Credit Union in the way in which he caused several young people to get the finances that were necessary for them to pursue their education, some of whom are lawyers and doctors and the rest of the high professionals and so on. And he was highly lauded for that, for using the credit union to help the advancement of those people who then would make a contribution to their society and their communities. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The topic my name is Marlene Joseph. I'm from Anthony's Employees Credit Union. We do good things down in South. The topic today is the role of cooperatives in national development. We would like to try to stay within the topic. But two men look from self-same bars. One saw the mud and the other the stars. So we can look at the same topic, but view it differently. What I'm hearing here this morning, I hope it's still morning because after 12 they say breakfast, so we're not getting lunch, is credit unions are hurting. And they are hurting with what's happening, and what's happening affects the role of credit unions in national development. Now, what's happening here this morning seems to be like we're pushing an open door. We're preaching to the choir. This conversation, as Mr. Thomas alluded to, supposed to be on the streets, as we did with Bandy Bill. The general public who are the members of the credit union are not aware, as he alluded to again. I was about to say that I say he must read my mind a bit. Not aware of what's happening, so we need to take it to them. We have our AGMs, and what happens at the AGM, as my partner from Tobago said, everybody wants to be the president. So the AGM is concentrated on the elections, and we go through the normal, genuine routine, the board reports. The general membership sometimes just watch people and they don't want to hear that. They want to hear how much dividend they're getting. But the membership, at the AGM, we don't have time to let the membership know what the credit union, the role and the function. They don't have time to let them know that they have insurances that die when that they pay off the debt. They're not aware of that. You have an education program, 2-3 people come out. We need to take it to the public and let each individual member from each of all the credit unions represented here, and even those not represented, to be aware of what's going on. We have our education fund that's mandatory. When you have your yearly audits, you put away your 5% or your 10% for the education allocation. If each credit union here was to take part of that allocation and sponsor something, it's Trinidad and Tobago, nobody can comment on nothing for getting nothing. Sponsor some aspect of keeping this public, and you have a sponsorship so the people know when they come out, Trinidad, even a glass of water, they want that, they come in. Allocate something from the education fund towards a program that will entertain, that will allow the membership on a people basis to know about the role and development of national development. This program here is good, we understand it because we are in the bowels of the credit union movement. We want it to be taken to the people. And for that to happen, we must get more involvement and people must come more committed. When we leave here, what next? When you leave here this morning after coming on here and all this nice paraphernalia, what happens next? Have you reached out some members? Have you reached out here? You like what I hear, you know? That didn't make sense to me. Better than come. They should have told me some more. But you've got to remember what you come to. You come to listen to the role of the cooperative in national development, what your cooperative can do. as Mr. Estrada espoused, we don't want to stray from that. So dealing with the hurt, you're hearing the hurt. Because when you come and tell me that I have to be involved in a mandatory deposit insurance, how does that come into the role of development, what cooperative, and applying a mandatory to you tell me I have to do that? What my credit union do to warrant that? What your credit union do to tell you you must pay that? What your credit union had to say? No, but sharks will always eat sardines. That is the culture of a shark. To eat, if a shark don't eat a sardine, well, that is one dirty shark. So that is the nature of a shark. It can't do nothing else but run down sardine and wait until they come together and eat them out. Ladies and gentlemen, chair, head table, I'm hearing the hurt of my fellow members. But for this to happen, we need, as I said before, to take it out there to the membership. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. But the microphones are unattended. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, members of the audience, I am Margaret Weston from PSU Credit Union. I'm also a member of the CCUM Technical Committee for the past, how many years, Brian, we on this thing? Plenty years. And I want to wear a slightly different hat this morning because I want to talk about our responsibility as individual credit unions to concentrate on this, to focus on this national development. Because I think a lot of what, and I agree with the president of Antilles, that we have to create an impression that will cause us to be recognized. And I'm sitting there this morning and I'm saying, how many of us as individual credit unions exercise what I would call cooperative social responsibility? Yes, cooperative social responsibility among our communities. Each one of us has units, developed headquarters, branches in communities. Sitting next to our big fancy buildings are these small huts and houses and so on where people perhaps are suffering. Whether or not we encompass that as part of our cooperative social responsibility is another matter. How many of us train our guns on recognizing the needs of the community and doing something extra perhaps to endear ourselves to the community as a powerhouse in that community? And I think this is perhaps where we should start. Because yes, we talk about national development and so on, but we have to start at the community level. We have to make sure that as we take it to the streets, as the president said, we can be absolved of any negative responsibility, that we are doing our part, because we have to justify the fact that we need to take it to the next level, which to me is the national level. But we have to start individually in our own communities. How are we helping to develop these communities and to recognize that we have a responsibility towards them? Yes, the government has its part to play, and that is where we can begin to partner with the government to ensure that we do what we should do. We talk about this 5% fund. Some credit unions are happy when they save all that money for the year. They haven't done a thing for education, but yes, we saved that money, that 5%, and we can add some more to it and so on. That's how you get the feedback from some of the credit unions. So we have to put in our strategic plans and so on, the need for us to recognize the needs of our community. And that is how we can get out there into the public and say to the government, this is what we have been doing. You bring us around the table and help us to get you to enhance your responsibility to the community by perhaps partnering with us and ensuring that that community effort that we are building is enhanced. And that's how I think we, in addition to wanting to get the recognition and the national policy, I agree with all of that, but I think we have to look inward. When we think back of the days of the susu, it used to work. There was integrity, there was trust among the members of the team. You dare not pay your susu because people are coming after you. So there was that leadership of the person collecting the susu, the trust between the person involved and the person collecting, and the trust for all the others that when I get my hand, when I'm expecting my hand, it will come. So we have to redevelop those simple values within the credit unions, look outward and see how we can then expand our service to include the members of the community in which we operate. That's my submission.
I want to say something.
Yes, sir. You had your hand up a couple of times, sir.
I want to say something. Yeah, I want to say something.
Yeah, okay.
Chairman, I didn't want to come back here, you know. But to see, based on the last three speakers, I'm going to go back to the last three speakers. For years, there's no policy. So what we do? We need the policy to guide us. But so what do we do in national development? Because there's no policy. We have to have something internal to drive that and force government to the table. When you look at other jurisdictions, they came together and forced the government to come to the table, you know, because they had a mobilization to drive. We have many units here right now, but each unit is in their own particular mode. We come here and we talk. I hear guards about Credit Union Bank. You long hear about that? You long? What is the internal arrangements that we can do and say, look, we want to open a new bank again to the government? People treat you how you treat yourself. God say, members went to the bank? Because sometimes our own units, we run our members. So go to the bank. So the bank say, close the account and come by me. The bank aim is to make the credit union poor by taking its members. That's what the bank doing. So are the bank right? They like money. So when I hear about we are here today for national development, these are the issues we are having in our units in the sector that we target that. And if we don't fix it, we'll come here session after session after session. As the young lady across there said, when we leave here, we get no lunch, so we go home here. It was all right. Here they talk, go back to our units, and that's done. What do we do in light of the government not even jumping in the name of cooperative? What do we do to drive that awareness in our environment of Trinidad and Tobago that we can contribute? We have credit unions lining up next to credit unions in communities. I could call some names. I ran here, PSU here, TechU here, Eastern here, in one street. So we have assets that if you come together like Jamaica, which is the cultural thing now, because all of us will be on our throne, reduce that overhead, that we can have more resources to serve our community better off. Imagine, 2 weeks ago I saw a document from the team, the government put the team, they have made arrangements with the banks to cash checks. It's years of hearing that. Donkey years of hearing that. And you know what the government say? We have no problem. But the bank say they have a problem. And we go to the bank to negotiate with the bank. But the government said they have a problem, eh? So we have a problem here. And if we can't solve the problem internal, we ain't going nowhere fast. We had to solve a problem. We had to come together. We have a credit union who has an ATM system. For years, they asked unions to come on ATM system to widen the net. They at ATM and links right now into the banking network. They'll go and form some other company with other financial institution to have some other card. That's what I'm talking about. If you don't fix internal, we ain't going nowhere fast as a movement. So we talk about national development. There's the same things we have to do about ourselves to pull the wider community in and force government to the table because we have that togetherness. If we do that, we can have all the units here. But if we're not willing to give us certain things to make that association tighter and more full, we're going to move fast. Thank you,
sir. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, you want to say something, Dr. Henry?
I think the gentleman, after him. Yeah.
Okay. Yes,
morning,
sir.
morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Great morning.
All protocol, is it still morning? Yes, it is. All protocol observed. I want to begin, my apologies. Keith London, Ventia Credit Union. I want to begin with aligning myself with the submission by Mr. Bayer when he began, and he spoke about great relationships. And he emphasized, in my estimation, that it is really about how well we manage the misunderstanding among us. And that is my way of perhaps begging your indulgence in case my submission reflects my own misunderstanding. I want to begin also with saying three things. When Mr. Bayer made his submission, somewhere in there he spoke, or he asked the question to us, where do we go from here? My own sense is that too much of his response that he purported spoke to we await, for those of us who can remember. That created some lamentation for me. I also want to go to the submission by Mr. Thomas, where he said that they were not serious in terms of making the changes, and they, in that case, I interpreted to mean the government. And to pose the question to him, perhaps, not for a response, but really to provoke the thinking. Is there an inverse relationship between ineptitude and seriousness? In other words, whether competence and seriousness has a relationship, just to provoke the discussion. Dr. Henry, in his submission, spoke about, or referenced the, what is it, the motto? Together we aspire, together we achieve, those national words. And what it created in my mind is the question of whether that statement really purported equity in sharing. It does say together we aspire, together we achieve, but I don't know that it intended that achievement and sharing on both sides of it be equitable. The final part of it that I want to talk about that perhaps has more relevance is that as per the flyer that we received and so on, we are here in terms of deciding or discussing the role of cooperative in national development. And I'm saying, as per the submissions made by several of the speakers, there is that basic innate approach that is invited in terms of how do we approach any system that we are seeking to put in place. And I want to suggest that perhaps that approach that speaks to the combination of people, process, and technology may not be an unworthy consideration. The submission by Ms. Weston spoke about the people involvement. The submission by somebody over there spoke about processes and policies. I think it was this gentleman, now that I remember it. And there's always the case of the appropriate application of technology to what we are about. So I want to suggest that perhaps in seeking to move this forward, we look at that basic requirement of any system that seeks to achieve the appropriate combination of people, process, and technology that optimizes the outcome or seeks to optimize the outcome in the ambition that we are pursuing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Henry?
Yeah. For most of my youth and as I moved into elderhood, I was in opposition to Eric Williams. I was a Tapia man. I felt that he had lost his moorings. But now, as I look back, go and read his early writings and look at what he did, I think I'm a Williams P&M. Because if you understand what this country was, and I'm an older person, and know how this place was in the 1940s when I was a little boy. And people like Eric Williams had a dream of transforming this place, which was the most developed country in the Caribbean. And to talk about industrialization in the 1940s and 1950s, in a plantation economy, you really had to be seen as having a screw slack. And when he had the money, you just remember capitalism and slavery. And he built Point Lisas in a 2x2 island with industry which he felt could match anything that the developed world had on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. He was aspiring for all of us to benefit. And together we aspire, and together we achieve. And you see it there, you see it in his other work, and the lament of the sharks are eating the sardines. In fact, a colleague of mine and deceased, Selwyn Ryan, wrote a book, Sharks and Sardines. You should look at that. So he was all about equity. And you could see, again, the lament. He felt, well, I tried one thing, I've tried to create jobs and so on, and get the ordinary people involved, and their incomes can rise, etc., etc. It didn't happen. They didn't create the jobs. They, of course, grew with all the industries that they created. They made money. I tried with a small business thing, cooperatives. Yes, some small businesses emerged, but soon the sharks ate the sardines. Failed. A man, desolate. So I have a better appreciation now as I look back at what the man tried. And the question is that the movement that he left, to my mind, has lost that ideological moorings of ready development of all the people. It's not there. And when I heard from a certain individual that this thing about transferring the resources to the people, you privatize the Point Lisas, which we created, this nationalism thing is done. That's passé. And you see it in other policies. In other countries, in the Far East, for example, they went through crises. East Asian crisis, Korea, Samsung, Hyundai, LG, whose products we use here, they were at risk. The Korean government didn't allow them to fail. Yes, it's capitalism, but it's national capitalism. They have that national head. And they're still fighting this rule about how you ensure that better distribution of income, etc. in Korea. But they didn't allow the Koreans to be eaten up, the Korean industry to be eaten up by foreign capital. Williams was creating national capital by the state entering, and hopefully in time we could find a way, find a mechanism through the unit trust, through other means, when you privatize, that all of us will have a share in it. Because there's always that tension between capitalism and wider ownership, democratizing of ownership. There's always that tension. The Cooperative Republic failed in Guyana, all right? So you have to see it from the perspective of a politician trying to develop a country, that you have to depend on some capital formation. It might not come through cooperatives and credit unions and all that. It might come from other sources. It might come from your capitalists, but you find a way to mitigate the rapaciousness of the capitalist system by creating structures that allow more and more of your people to share and to benefit.
All right, so I just got a signal from the chairman that we...
Well, sorry, just one last point, and the point made by Ms. Weston. I absolutely agree with you that we have to move to cooperative social responsibility. And before coming here, and I didn't address it in the way that Mr. Bayer requested about cooperative in the social services. I have been wondering, and I don't have an answer, but can the cooperative movement, and in particular the credit unions, play a role in cooperative social responsibility in treating with the biggest challenge that we have in this country? That all of us, every time we walk out in the road, we are afraid, we feel that we have a sense of the vulnerability of our person and our property. Can we do something in our communities as cooperators to fight this scourge of our youth succumbing to gang violence and all that goes with it? Can we do something? I don't know.
All right, I just got a signal from the chairman. I think we're pushing up against time. We're going to, Mr. Chairman, to midday, is that it? All right, I just on a personal level then, Dr. Henry, is it correct to conclude from what you just said then that you're recanting Tampier's scandalization of invitation or industrialization by invitation?
Yes, and I did that a long time ago, because everybody who, and I was an exception, everybody who talked about Lewis, Lewis was put up like a big boboli industrialization. Lewis didn't say industrialization by invitation, or his best, who caricatured.
Yeah.
But when you read Lewis, you realize that Lewis was really path-breaking. All right? And when you come around, when you read the works of both Best and Lewis and Williams, there's not much difference about them,
Right, we're the same. Thank you very much. So we don't have a lot of time. I suppose less than 5 minutes. Is there any other contribution to come from anyone of you all? Yes, sir.
Morning. Brian Matthew, Aero Services Credit Union. Okay, is me? Loud enough?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, so I know we're short on time, so very quickly, I just want to address from two perspectives. One is, a lot of people have asked, where do we go from here? And that's fundamentally important. But secondly, I just want to quickly identify that we have made representation at senior levels. I myself, Margaret Weston, Ken Bayer, we would have had an opportunity to address the minister, and still we have not seen the progress from there. So I just want to remind us, or hark us back to when we had the opportunity to galvanize support. I don't know if many of you remember the PPD document, and what it meant, where we felt that it was not in the best interest of the collective movement. But I say all that to say that we found a way then to come together because we felt that what was being put before us was not in our best interest. And I say that if we can do it then, I feel strongly that we can do it again. I feel that advocacy is important, and therefore, if we have not been able to get through to the minister, the line minister, then we should escalate that, perhaps maybe to the Prime Minister, because we feel that we have an important message and a concern that is of national interest. There is value in the community outreach and the community elevation of the information at the community level, because I feel that in much the same way we went to the various communities when we were together walking around the financial building, we can again galvanize that support. And I feel there is value in sustained effort. Effort at every level. Effort at the community level, effort at the advocacy level, and then through the use of technology, we can bring it home together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, on the assumption that there's no one else who wants to make a contribution, I just want to say how I think useful it was and how grateful I feel for having been asked to come and do this as a credit union member myself, apart from other things. And I want to just put us all back in the hands of the chairman. Illustrious Mr. Estrada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, Sir Andy Johnson. Members, in keeping with time, I didn't chat with Dr. Henry, but from the academic side, you need to have strategy. You need to have a plan. We could develop a plan as to what our objectives are and seeking what are the desired outcome. We can develop that plan on a consultative approach, or somebody can start it, share it around, and get some input and have some decisive. But predominant from this is that we see the value of what cooperatives can do for national development. I think it is a necessity, and it's in terms of a model to go forward in national development, cooperatives play a primitive part, a prime part to go towards that. So having said that, time does not allow to collect some of the feedback, which I know you're very eager to provide in terms of this action, the notes to develop that action plan. But from the technical committee, I know we would start something, share the information around with you, and then we'd come to some consensus as to how our next approach would be. I think that is a preferred way to do it. Do I get an agreement on that? Right. In terms of the program, I was trusting that my good friend, Mr. Johnson, would have given you a summary, but I think we would have skipped all of that because you would have been able to internalize what I've just said there, mean a little bit of condensation. My good friend would have told me, no way, and I challenge you. And my good friend in this regard is a friend of mine from Tobago sitting at a table here. He wasn't here for all the session, but he goes by the name of Dr. James, a little stick like the ribs at time. Yes, so having said that much, the program has an item called voter thanks and indeed, presentations. My team, do we have any presentations to be made at this point in time to our panelists? Do we? Other members of my team, do we have any presentation to be made to our panelists, or is it something that we do not off camera? Off camera, okay. So at this point in time, down to do the voter thanks, one of my colleagues on the team, I do not know if he's... Are you prepared? I would now like to invite Mr. Brian Moore, a member of the technical committee of the CUM, to give you all a voter thanks. But before he does that, I want to thank each and every one of you for showing up here this morning, showing that kind of interest. It tells me that there is some sort of a loyalty towards the cooperative credit union movement. And aligned to that, there is an interest amongst us what role that sector can play in national development. I think that I'm getting that feedback in a subtle way from your participation here today. So thank you very much. Brian Moore?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get into my voter thanks, I want to especially welcome my good friend, Dr. Winford James. We have managed to resurrect you, sir. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that, like me, you are heartened by today's presentations. One of the mandates of the technical committee is to maintain channels of communication within and among the sector. We think that has been lacking through perhaps no fault of anyone. But we have decided to take up that mantle to ensure that there is continuous communication, continuous discussion, identification of issues, and more importantly, some coherent response coming from the sector on the matter of these identified issues. But let me begin by thanking our presenters, Dr. Ralph Henry, who always gives us many things to think about, and he has not disappointed this morning. Mr. Garth Thomas, who at relatively short notice, as Dr. Henry said, opened the innings very well and set a kind of tone for our deliberations. Thank you, Garth. To our moderator, Mr. Andy Johnson, who always manages to knit things together very nicely and professionally. Thank you, Andy. Let me as well thank all the members of the technical committee for the work they have done in bringing this together. This is a continuation of efforts, communication efforts that the technical committee started years ago. Some of our events were done in conjunction with the League. We had hoped that this one as well would be done in conjunction with the League, but you know how things go. So there will be opportunities in the coming months for us to get together again. We will ensure that and discuss those pressing issues that are necessary to be discussed so that the sector can move ahead positively and offer more hope to the ordinary man, working man and woman. But most of all, I want to thank all our participants this morning, especially those who made contributions. This is our business. We have to mind our own business. Nobody is going to mind it for us. And we, as someone said, we have to come up with the solutions that are relevant and appropriate to the conditions we have. And I hope we will take that on board and a lot of the suggestions that were made here today and move forward in a more assertive way. So once again, thank you all, moderators, panelists, moderator, and the TC, thank you very much, and we hope to see you all soon again. Thank you all.
So thank you, folks. Get home, get to your destination safely. I know it's the carnival season. And don't allow the confirmation of a commissioner of police for you to drop your guard. Thank you very much. First female commissioner of police, Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. Why is it the men clapping? You see Dr. Elio?